Hey everybody, in this video we are going to talk chiller controls with the new system. So how do we control the chiller plant with this new system that we've installed? So this page right here is structureware for building operation, or SBO as we call it, structureware for building operation. This is the control platform. We talked about control versus monitoring in a video past. This structureware SBO software is the controls, whereas Ignition just monitors that. It gets data from SBO and presents it in Ignition. So to get here, everybody has access. You navigate to 10.156.9.130, and the password is the same as Ignition. We log on. So this is the screen you're presented with. This is what they call the default engineering workspace in the web client. This is just what you get. So come down here where it turns into double arrows, and you can drag this stuff down because you'll want as much screen as you can get. So I'd like to actually look at the graphics of this system first. It starts making a little bit more sense when we start explaining modulating valves and different things to see where the relationship is. So we'll click chilled water system. We will go down to graphics, and I will actually open this in a new tab because I want to go back between the two. So here's our nice graphic that we have displayed in the NOC, and you can put this on your workstation as well. So I'm going to run through the left-hand pane and then try to start explaining how the system works in auto, and then we'll talk about how we manipulate the system in hand, is what we would call hand, and then ultimately manual, which is physically going out and moving valves and things out up on the roof. So first things first, here's our panel over here. This is telling us that the chilled water system enable status. That means the program that actually is running, the scripts that are controlling this, is enabled. And this is the chiller rotation button. You click that button and it initiates the program to rotate chillers. The minimum chiller call, we have, this tells the program how many chillers we want to run in a normal condition. So we can change that from 2 to 1 to 3, whatever the case may be. And once we actually change it to 1, we'd have to tell it OK, which of course we're not going to do that at this point. This is the lead chiller call. So this is telling us what chiller is the lead chiller right now. It thinks it's C. Pump rotation, how you rotate the pumps. Minimum pump call, we can control how many pumps we want to run. A is the lead right now. This is seemingly not working. This is a timer that will tell us how long since we last rotated. Since this program has executed, I'm sure it's just a computation of that. This chiller flow is telling us the flows, the total, the sum of this flow meter, this flow meter, this flow meter, this flow meter. Outdoor air temperature, self-explanatory. And here's actually the set points that the program uses to run the program. We have a differential pressure set point of 5 psi. We have a chilled water temperature set point of 46, and we have a chiller flow set point of 550. Hopefully, at the end of this, you'll be able to at least understand a little bit about how we're controlling the system and what each one of these numbers mean and why we came up with this number. Moving down here, we have maintenance mode, which just suppresses alarm email generation. So we'll get the email. Typically what John does programs in his systems is we'll still get the alarms on the screen, but it just won't send an email. So you can toggle that on and off if you need to. I don't plan on using it a whole lot because you kind of want to know when alarms come in, even when the chiller's off, just to kind of prove. It just gives you the peace of mind that, hey, the emails are actually working on these things, because otherwise they run relatively simple. Moving on down here, we have the status of all our pumps, what they're commanded to run at, what they're actually running at, and whether there's alarms or what the program is telling them to do. Up here we have the same thing for the chiller. So we know if the program is saying, hey, should this be on or not. And then we have the chiller A status, which is just a run. It's a 1 or a 0, off or not. And then we have this reset button. So this is very similar to what you guys have always used in Chase. Just telling you the new things that we've added are the flow meters. Beforehand, we didn't really know what the water was flowing through the pipes, which is actually really useful for energy efficiency's sake, which we'll explain in a little bit. And we didn't have isolation valves, so even when chillers were off, you were still flowing water through them. So water was flowing through these, adding head pressure. We were losing pressure through the pipes and things of that nature. So that's why we added these motorized isolation valves, so we can actually turn these off so water is no longer flowing through these systems. So and the bypass valve, we added the bypass valve, which we'll explain. I'll get to that, but just know that's where it physically is on the roof, tying the return and supply loops together. And then we have the what would that be, the east loop, and then we have the west loop that goes down to the data center. So right now everything is forced to go down the east side. All the valves are turned off that would go down this loop. So we don't really care about the water going down this loop a whole lot, not to be confused with the temperatures of this loop. So what else? So let's actually start talking about, at this point I think it's appropriate to say, hey, how do we control the chillers? So let's say for whatever reason we need to make sure chiller A turns on. Let's say C died, the program, the auto program did not run, something is majorly wrong. Let's say both of these chillers then die, something's wrong with the pumps, these chillers go out on loss of flow, whatever the case may be. This is how you actually interface with this system to turn chiller 1 on. So C and D have an alarm, everything's blinking red. For this case, let's say the pumps are running fine, there's no alarms on the pumps. So let's go back to your screen here. You navigate all the way back to the beginning, and everything's going to be on the I/O bus. So this is a list representation of everything that's installed in the BMS cabinet that's out in the back hallway. So each one of these are labeled correctly. This is how they're labeled inside the cabinet as well. And for record, this is the devices that we're talking about. These are the devices that are installed in that cabinet that we actually control via this software. So briefly, when we talk about auto and hand, that's physically what this means, is the position of this switch, the analog outputs. So we can put the system in hand 2 different ways. We can do it in software or physically hit the switch on this controller. So normally we would want to do software if at all possible. So we would just know we want to start chiller A. So we want to start chiller A. I just know that it's on M2 because the isolation valve, if you remember from previous videos, the isolation valve is what controls whether that chiller is going to run or not. So we go down to chiller A, isolation valve, position, not feedback. Feedback is a number telling us where it is. So we went, sorry, I was panicking because I saw this having a value and forgot it was the bypass. So the chiller A isolation valve position is the one you want. You go in here. This will tell you the value that it is. This is what's always called the feedback. It'll tell you exactly what valve it is, and then the requested value. What is the system telling it to do? So we want to force this valve to open at 100%. We would hit save, and we would literally start to see this valve right here starting to open. The command would go immediately to 100, and then the feedback would start climbing 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. And I believe I was told this is a 60-second valve, so it will take it's got to be a 30-second valve. So from 0 to 100, it'll take 30 seconds, which still seems too slow if I'm actually thinking about it. But that's what the valve is rated for, so we're just going to run it with that assumption. So we tell it save, boom, it immediately starts opening, and then this chiller starts. You'll see the animation go chiller enable on and chiller A status running, and then you'll start seeing the fans operating like this, and the capacity will start increasing as more compressors kick on, as the chiller stages up. At that point, once this is climbing, the flow meter will start climbing up to 550, and we just know that because that's the set point. That's what it's gonna do. That's how we control that. So on and so forth. If you need to control the B chiller, B ISO valve position, tell it 100 via force 100 save. Super simple, and that's all you need to do to start the chillers via the software. That's it. Then you just monitor and make sure things are happening. Okay, so let's say we want to shut down C for whatever reason right now, and we want to do it in hand. We want to do it right now. We go to chiller C, M2, we tell it ISO valve position, we force it to 0. We hit save. Again, this command goes to 0, and then the feedback counts backwards from 100% down to 0. This chiller shuts off. The program would probably see that, and then it would automatically, since the rest of the chillers are in auto, it's going to call for chiller A to run. I just know that's what's going to happen. We do not want to save changes. So we've talked about how to do the chillers. Super easy. Let's talk about how you control it in the software. The pumps. So the pumps are on the exact same page. So if we want to control pump A, we click A, and we go to chilled water speed, and this is where we tell it, okay, we want to run at 50%, 100%. In an emergency situation, you always choose 100% and hit save, and then that speed will increase. You'll see it here. Say speed command 100%, and the feedback will start climbing up to 60 hertz. Probably going to land somewhere in the 58 hertz range, just because that's just how it works. And that pump will be flowing. At that point, if we control this manually, the GPM on any of the chillers that's running will increase because the speed increases. More water is flowing through the system. Likewise, if we want to control pump B, we go to B, M2, C, and D ultimately. So that's how we command these systems on via software. So let's say this software is unavailable, something's happened, network's down, something, and we have to control the chillers. We notice something is wrong with the chillers. You walk up to this device right here, and in this pane you'll see that it says chiller A isolation valve. You click that into hand, and this trim pot, if it's spun all the way to the top, all the way around, that's 100%. If you spin it halfway, it'll go to 50, and of course 0. So that's what that potentiometer in there does. That's what controls when you click it in hand. This potentiometer controls the valve position, and likewise the chilled water pump speed. So the pump speed will be labeled as well, and it'll be labeled 1, 2, and 3. and this is where you see that it correlates 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, 4 to 4. Super easy, super easy. Obviously, in a stressful situation, you know, it really depends on who you are and what your comfortability is. I think in a you know, oh crap situation, we've got to get something up. I think it's probably best just to go flip switches. So you'll come in here, you'll see this, just flip the switch on and verify, just double check visually that this is spun all the way up, because there are cases where we may want to spin it down in hand, and someone may forget to go put it to 100. So prudence would just tell you, the operator, make sure this potentiometer is at 100, click it in hand, and either that valve will open, the chiller will start, or that pump will run at 100%. So now that we've talked about how we control these things manually through the software, which is what we would call in hand, we'll talk about the overall system design. So the major points that we made was that we turned this system from a constant flow, you know, the pumps are on 100%, just running all the time on any chiller that's running. We converted a constant flow system to a variable primary system. So variable meaning we modulate the pump speed up and down, and primary just means the accomplish of the header. So we only have one set of pumps, so that's on the primary side of the chiller system. A secondary side would have pumps that would run to like a cooling tower or things like that, which we don't need. More pumps equals, you know, more energy and less energy efficient. So variable primary systems are very common in the data center industry. It's just it's a good design, very energy efficient. You can really fine tune it and get some optimal performance out of it, as we will witness, you know, here soon as our PUE goes down, or energy consumption goes down. We're saving money, but we're also, you've probably noticed, the data center is the coldest it's ever been, which is changing, but you know, for the last couple months, the data center under the floor has been freezing, which we've accomplished that with less energy consumed. We're running less chillers at a reduced capacity and less pumps, so that's huge. It's just a testament to the design of the system and how we're operating it. So getting back to it, we talked about why we installed the pumps. It's a variable primary system. We're controlling these pumps. We added differential pressure sensors, and we added flow meters, and we added isolation valves. We added a bypass valve as well. So the secret sauce of the variable primary system we've discussed is to modulate the pump speed. Okay, well, how do we modulate the pump speed? How do we do that? We modulate the pump speed based off a differential pressure, a pressure reading difference between the supply and the return lines. And that number is just a number we picked. We kind of just know what the system should run at. It's an engineered solution. So 5 psi is just a good starting number for this particular system. So that's what we want. So these pumps are controlled by this differential pressure reading. So these pumps will spin up and down, modulate to maintain this differential pressure. And there are 2 loops. So we do know the differential pressure, that's for redundancy. You know, if this sensor dies, we don't want the system to freak out and either shut off or run at 100%. You know, best case scenario, everything runs at 100%, but that's not always the case. I mean, we've had data center outages over less in various sites that we own. So that's why we do that. We have 2. It'll always control off the one that's the lower, closer to the set point is how it's set up. So 5, that's the number. We know that because that is what's over here. This is the set point. So these pumps will again modulate up and down to maintain that differential pressure. See, we just see it drop. We just saw it dropped at 3.3. These will start spinning up to get back to the right speed. And now that it overshot, it's backing off a little bit, going back to 60, 65. See, since we're still up, the system's telling it, hey, back down to 64. That's actually really cool that we got to see that while we're sitting here. But that's what the system's constantly doing. It's going to modulate these pumps to maintain this pressure, differential pressure. And let's talk about the bypass valve next. So the bypass valve is exactly that. It's bypassing all of the Cray units down on the floor. So there is a case, these pumps aren't going to run fast enough to move enough water through the system to maintain the minimum flow set point of 550. So let's say, this loop pressure is at 5, but the pumps are not moving enough water. They're running too slow and not moving enough water through the system. That's where this bypass valve comes in. So if I were to close this bypass valve to 0, all of the water would then be running down to the Crays, and we would lose flow on these chillers. So we're actually going to see it start modulating. So this is at 502. It just commanded, and see it went to 20 from 17. So there it goes to 20. Now it's saying, uh-oh, I got to open more. And now we're seeing the flow increase. So then once it gets to that set point, it'll evaluate and say, okay, now I'm at 600 GPM. Well, let's back down. There it was, 25. It went from 27 to 25. Now it's going to 23, 22. That's exactly what the system's doing. So this bypass valve, all it cares about is maintaining minimum flow over these chillers, which is 550 is what we've told the system to do. Let's talk about the command valves, the isolation valves. So that's another component that we added. Previously, if you had a chiller that was off, the remaining chillers, just due to the way the valving was on the roof, it was actually flowing water through the system. So there was water moving through these pipes without this chiller being on. So that adds extra head pressure, loss of flow, which is why we think that you could only run, a certain configuration of chillers for the system to actually cool properly. We're literally thinking that water wasn't getting to certain parts of the data center because all the valves were wide open. The water didn't know where to go. There was no pressure to accomplish the flow that we needed. And since you guys didn't have flow meters, we had no idea what the flow is. Whether we knew the chillers were maintaining minimum flow because they weren't shutting off. We knew they were more than 550. But then again, you only need 550, so if we were running at 900 GPM, you're just using extra, energy, and you're still having pressure problems. So you're using more energy, and you're not accomplishing the objective of the data center, which is staying cold or staying cool. So this is ultimately, again, what dictates whether this chiller runs or not. When this ISO valve this feedback gets above 80, it's going to send the signal that on this end position switch is going to close and tell the chiller, hey, let's start, and it'll start staging up. If this valve is less than 80, it's telling the chiller, hey, shut off. So that's as simple as that is. What can we talk about? We can talk about some of these right here. So this is just an indicator whether chiller's program. This is not actually telling it whether it's on or off. The enable is what the program is telling it to do. So the program with a minimum chiller call of 2 is telling 2 chillers to be on. And we know that the chiller C is the lead. That's why C is running. And that will rotate if we hit that to D, and then A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D is now the rotation. So the status is from the unit as well. So that's what it's actually. So there is an instance where this thing could be enabled on. It's calling for it, but it's not running. And the program knows that and will actually count down. I think it's 180 seconds. 180 seconds is going to be repeated a lot, just because that's a good time that we all agreed upon for these alarms and different staging and things to run. So if on but stopped, this thing will know that. It'll start a counter and then say, oh, this chiller did not come on. I'm locking it out. And this will turn red. So chiller enable will turn red, saying this chiller got called. We waited for it, the 180 seconds. It did not turn to running. We're going to lock it out. We say no more, it's not going to run. If that happens, of course, you have to clear the alarm condition, the state that which the chillers are in, and then you click this reset button, and we'll put the reset. It will reset the program and tell it, hey, chiller C's back online. So the program would then start calling for it again. And that's the same for all the chillers. So what else do we have on this screen? I don't think in this video we talked about the rotation. So if you need to rotate the units, you simply click this. And that will tell the program to start A, let it run for 180 seconds. If it comes on within those 180 seconds, cool. It'll say, okay, chiller A has been on for 180 seconds. Let's start the timer to shut chiller C, since it's the lead, chiller C to shut off. So it'll go through another timer, another 180 seconds, and say, okay, chiller A has been on, it came on, it's ran for 180 seconds. Let's start the timer for 180 seconds to shut chiller C off. And then by that time, this has already staged a couple compressors, and it's well on its way to maintaining the set point. That's something we did not talk about, is the set point. So of the supply. So the chiller's primary job, the only thing it cares about is this supply temperature right here, 46 degrees. That's all it cares about. So the compressors in here will stage up and down accordingly, which is this capacity here. As more compressors kick on, the capacity increases, and it wants to maintain 46.4. That is the chiller's only job, is to supply 46 degree water. And as we talked about, it's the isolation valve's job to make sure that this chiller is enabled and water is flowing through the unit. It's the pump's job to maintain this differential pressure. It's the bypass valve's job to maintain minimum chiller flow. So everything has one job. As long as it works, everything works perfectly. And the data center is nice and cool. So that's the supply temps, and then of course this is the loop temperature, which is down at the crack 63, I believe. So we're measuring the water coming off the units at 40, roughly 47 degrees, and we know there's not much heating that occurs down at the data center. We have a tenth of a degree difference, so we know we're not losing any, we're not gaining any heat into the system. So that's fantastic. So that's pretty much it. I know it's a kind of scary controlling a chiller plant, but I hope at least now this accomplishes a couple things. You're comfortable navigating in the web station. There's nothing in here, when I learn a new software, I want to know what I can break. There's nothing in here that you can break without a command. So if I come in here and I want to change the valve position, it's going to make me save. It's going to have some checks. There's nothing in this software that you're going to mess up, provided you're in the right spot. So IO bus and this O3 chill water folder is pretty much the only places you need to be. You can poke around and start looking at the BACnet interface. So this is actually the protocol that controls the pumps, and the IP network is where we brought the chillers in. So you can look and see anything that's on that display down in 300 hallway is going to be on here as well. So You know, if there's a chiller alarm, you can actually look at it here. It's pretty slick versus having to go back to the controller in the back, that thermostat looking thing back there. I use that a lot when we have issues. And that's pretty much it. The Modbus interface is just simply the how we're actually telling SBO what points to give to ignition. You don't really need to know that. This is the addresses and the values and different things like that. Not applicable. But yeah, feel free to poke around. Anything, you know, typically in these two folders are something that you're it is actually going to be useful, as well as this backman interface. You can look at what the chillers are doing, and that's on the IP network again. You can see all 4 chillers on here. So now you know you're not going to mess anything up. That makes it a little easier to navigate through and everything. And of course, you have our nice screen here that's showing you what we're doing. So that gives Objective 1, give you confidence navigating SBO, is checked. Second is, how do you actually operate those, in an emergency situation? How do I control these things via software? Again, you come in here and control the isolation valve or the speed for the pumps. Likewise, we hit the switch, this hand switch. That's learning objective number 2. And then 3, kind of just getting a refresher on how the system works, the principles behind a variable primary system, why it works the way it does, how it works, and everything like that. So, yeah, I hope it's just a little bit more familiarity in those, three objectives. And of course, if you have any questions, concerns, you can always let me know, and we'll talk about it and get you taken care of. So I love talking facility stuff, so if you need to, give me a call or shoot me an email or something, and I can run through this a little bit more detail. We'll probably have to update work instructions and things like that with all this information. So this is not the only medium in which you're going to learn this stuff, so you'll be in good shape. Again, I just keep preaching this, but it's as simple as being able to read what this tag is. It'll say chiller A isolation valve. You turn it to hand, that chiller is going to turn on if this potentiometer is at 100%. That chiller is going to turn on. You're going to see it. It's going to start working. Same thing with the pumps. If you need to turn it off, turn it off. And it's that simple. And, provided that all these little devices are working properly, which is highly, highly likely, these devices are just going to run. You're not going to have an issue controlling the chiller plant. It's a really simple system from an operational standpoint of, I gotta have water flowing and I need a chiller running, and the data center will work. We only need 1 chiller, 1 pump for the entire DC300, so it's fantastic. We're at N plus 3 really. So that's all. Again, I've kind of rambled on quite enough, and I will check back and talk to you guys later. See ya.